Okay? All right, so today's Crown Forum is actually part of University of Michigan's Taubman School or Taubman College for Architecture and Urban Planning's visit. There's actually a three-day visit that'll be today, tomorrow, and Friday, where graduate students from the college are actually engaging those who are interested in or have some curiosity about urban planning. The speaker for today is a graduate of Morehouse College, a 1996 graduate, Harley Etienne. He is a friend and colleague of mine. And the work that the graduate students will be doing in introducing urban planning to you all through the workshops that will extend again today and tomorrow will very much be anchored in some of the work that he has in fact done around urban planning in Atlanta in specific. Okay? I can hear you guys talking right there in the corner. So if I could get everybody's attention, that'd be helpful. All right. So Harley Etienne is Assistant Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Michigan's Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning, as explained. He teaches in the areas of urban community development, inner-city revitalization, development, neighborhood change, urban poverty, and qualitative research issues in planning. Etienne's research focuses primarily on the intersection of social institutions and their relationship to processes of urban neighborhood change. He is keenly interested in the role that colleges and universities play in contributing to neighborhood-level change and regional economic development. He recently released Pushing Back the Gates, Neighborhood Perspectives on University-Driven Change in West Philadelphia on Temple University Press. His current projects include an examination of the role of land tenure policy and land rights in the post-earthquake recovery of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and an edited volume, Planning Atlanta Ruins and Resurgence, which surveys the history of planning in that city. Prior to pursuing a PhD, Etienne worked in Philadelphia in the public policy and economic development sectors for Greater Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania Economy League, where he worked on various policy issues, including university-industry partnerships, K-12 school reform, healthcare access, and welfare policy. Again, Harley graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. He has a master's in urban studies from Temple University and a PhD in city and regional planning from Cornell University. Today, Professor Etienne will talk to us a little bit about sovereignty and Black Lives Matter. So without further ado, Professor Harley Etienne.
Before I get started, you brothers who are in the back, please come in, sit up here, sit by the stage. I don't want you standing for the hour. It's just not fair to you. Try to find a seat if you can. So I say hour, but I promise you that I will not take that much of your time. I will do my best to be brief. So, good morning. I have to say, this is the 20th year since I graduated from Morehouse, and there is no greater compliment than to be invited back here. I'm so pleased to be here. I have a lot of friends who now teach here, Dr. Wallace Sharif, Lance Shipman, David Wall Rice, Johanse Murray, I'm so happy just to be here. It's a nice way to bring in my 20th anniversary year from Morehouse, and just to see your faces and to be in this really wonderful space. So, a couple people are not here, and I want you to pass the message on to them. I want you to pass the message on to Dr. McKengie and to Dean Carter, because they can't be here today, and tell them that I appreciate them for being the wonderful advisors and professors that I had here and for being pillars in my education. None of the stuff that I've done since leaving here would have been possible without their encouragement. If you're working with them, don't take them for granted. They are invaluable gems to this institution, and you should appreciate the professors who work so hard to be here and to be here with you. So way back in the day, I was really involved on campus, and I was active with New Student Orientation, Student Government, and I was one of the organizers of New Student Orientation back in 1993. And I heard Dr. Cole, then president of Spelman, say something to the crowd that I promised if I ever got the chance to be on a stage like this, I would say it to you. And this is not about planning, but it kind of is. I want you to take care. I want you to take care of yourselves. I want you to take care of this space. And when I say take care, I mean know what you have in terms of this experience and know what it means to actually make sure you have enough in the reserve to for the journey that you have ahead of you. Know what you need. Know what you have in the relationships of the people around you. And that's what she meant when she said that to the crowd she was speaking to. She said, it's going to be rough after you leave here. You are at one of the crown jewels of the HBCU system, and much is going to be asked of you. Be ready, and you're going to need the relationships that you're forming here as you move forward with your life and your career. Don't take it for granted. I know that I haven't, and the relationships I formed while I was here are some of the most important that I have in my life, and they have carried me through some very dark times. Don't take it for granted. So, about planning. I love space. I love spaces. I love this room. I remember being in here for concerts, lectures, debates, meetings of all kinds. I love space. I love cities. I love being in cities. I love watching the crowds at 3rd Street Station in Philadelphia, people running to catch the trains to New York. I love having cocktails on South Beach in Miami. I love getting a Coney in Detroit. I love going to Mac's in Philadelphia to get my cheesesteaks there. Who knows about that? I love food, too. So I say all that to say that I wanted to be a planner, and I became a planner because of this love of cities, of loving the combination of both the architecture and the drama and the excitement of cities and all the stuff that goes into them. So when I say that I love space, it's not just that I love watching the city. I want them to be better. I want them to be great. I want them to be interesting, and I want them to be places that actually are appropriate and good and healthy and vital for us. And when I say us, I mean us, people who look like us. Not just black people, black and brown people. If you think about this space, and this space has changed since I've been here, this room was pristine. It was valuable. It was something that we walked into with reverence, King Chapel as well. That there's something that we say when we care about our space, there's something that we are communicating about our values and about ourselves when we care about a space. So being a planner means that this is who we are. When we care for a space, this is what we're saying that we value and what we love about a place. This is true for campuses, and this is also true for cities. So when I was a young kid, I grew up in Boston, and my parents decided that at some point it was time for us to move. And so we moved from Boston to suburban Fort Lauderdale. When I was in Boston, I had a part-time job, I had my friends, I had this life, I had my barbershop where I get my high-top fade tightened up every week. I had some independence. I used to just move about the city. I had to be home at a certain time, but I had some freedom. And then I got to suburban Fort Lauderdale, and I found the exact opposite. I had to be driven everywhere. I didn't have a license yet. I was dependent. I wasn't sovereign anymore. So when I came to Morehouse, I was proud of that decision, not just because of what I was coming to and how great this institution was. I was proud because it was my decision. I was exercising some sovereignty. I was exercising a choice. So David can tell you, and other people can tell you, when I was here, I was not one to praise Morehouse. I was very critical of it. In some ways, I still am. I think it's the most imperfect, perfect place anywhere. But I still love it. And I say all that to say that being here gave me a sense of sovereignty, that when I was in a room like this with people who look like me, who were brilliant and smart and talented and dynamic, and that I had the freedom to move about the city and this campus as I wished, without the fear of racist cops or being judged because of my color, I loved that. It gave me a great sense of freedom. And that's exactly what I want through planning. I want us to move about our world sovereign. So just a quick anecdote about sovereignty. Last night, my chair and I flew in last night from Michigan, and our flight was late. We got to our hotel, and they had given our rooms away. It was late. We were tired. We had to go all the way to Buckhead for a hotel. It wasn't so great. We overpaid. It was not so wonderful. But once you get in your room, the sense of safety and control that you finally get to let go and relax and say, I'm now sovereign, even for just a few hours. I get to be in control of my space. And so that now, as I'm older and getting older, the most important thing to me is that every day I have a moment where I'm sovereign over my space. That I am somehow in control of what I do. If I want to get up and eat cereal at 3 in the morning, I can do that. There are limits. I can't hurt other people. I can't blast my music at 3 a.m. But for a moment, at least one moment a day, I get to be sovereign. So there's something about that becomes so important, and I want to tie that to a definition of planning. So my national association, our national association, the American Planning Association, defines planning as this. City planning, urban planning, regional planning is a dynamic profession that works to improve the welfare of people and their communities by creating more convenient, equitable, healthful, efficient, and attractive people for present and future generations. That's a mouthful. But I prefer this definition from my friend Howie Baum, that planning is the organization of hope. So I'll say that again. Planning is the organization of hope. Hope is wonderful. Sometimes it's the only thing that you have when times are hard. And it's hard to get, it's hard to hang on to. But hope by itself is just hope. Hope requires an agenda, an itinerary, a plan. It requires a direction. Without it, you just have hope. Have that with the agenda, with the plan. So when we plan well, we plan really wonderful things. 50 years ago, the idea of Atlanta having a subway was a joke. But now Atlanta couldn't function without it. 20 years ago, the Beltline, which is being constructed as I speak, was a joke. It didn't exist. It was the idea of a master's student at Georgia Tech who said, there is this rail line that's just sitting there unused. What can we do with it? And here we are, investing billions into creating this 22-mile loop around the city. Atlantic Station didn't exist. It was an abandoned steel foundry that was just sitting there, waiting to be developed. And now it's one of the most vibrant parts of the city. But there's some other stuff. And I love those projects, but they're not perfect. They're not perfect by a long shot. I stumbled across planning completely by accident. So as a kid, I had an aunt who worked at the cafeteria at the Newsweek building in New York, and before they would throw away the magazines, she would mail me the stack of the magazines every month. And so I read them just until they were tatters. I memorized them because I love politics, but I also love cities. I got to high school, we started having video games that actually allowed us to simulate how city planning worked, and I really did just think it was a game. Some of you may have played SimCity, or the advanced version of it. So one day, I go over to Spelman for a grad school fair, and I run across this little white guy sitting at a little table all by himself with no one talking to him. And I take pity on him, and I go over and talk to him, and I say, what is this? He says, it's city planning. And we start talking, and I realized, oh, like the game. I said, yeah, you can do this for a living. Wow. Well, fast forward a couple years after I finished my doctorate, I moved into his office as he retired. And the rest, as we say, is history. So fast forward to 2016. I live 40 miles from Detroit. I go there often. And those of you who've never been to Detroit, it is both better and worse than you've heard. It's both. And it's springing to life. There's a new light rail going in. There are new apartments being built, buildings being renovated. There are waiting lists to get an apartment in downtown Detroit. You can't find housing because so many people want to be there right now to be a part of what's happening there. It's a good thing, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous for the inclusion. I'm nervous for what this means for sovereignty. Detroit is a city that's 83% African American. Just take that in. A city of 700,000 people that is 83% African American. No other city of its size comes anywhere close to that, not even Atlanta. That's a lot. But what's going to happen with this dynamism is that all of the stuff that's going on is clustered in two places, Midtown Detroit and downtown Detroit, where the white people happen to be. So someone's cutting the turkey while everyone else sits around and watches the feast and starves. And that's a problem. I worry about this because we could reach a moment when Detroit and what Detroit is right now becomes a memory. Motown, the thing that made popular music today, becomes a footnote. We forget what it was. Those of you who are from D.C. probably don't know that once upon a time, Georgetown and Foggy Bottom were all black. They were predominantly black. And now there's no trace of any of that in those cities. And the same could happen to Harlem, the same could happen in West Philadelphia, the same thing could happen to Baltimore, the same thing could happen to LA, and again, and again, and again, and again. So in my research, I'm interested in this question. If we revitalize a place, how do we do it without displacing the people who live there? How do you do place upgrading and incumbent upgrading at the same time? So we used to have a really robust urban policy discussion in this country. It used to be really great. And it was great because there was a focus on the people, not just the places. And we called it the urban crisis, and it was a problem. It was a puzzle that we wanted to figure out. We wanted to figure out how to kind of get there and figure out how to make these things wonderful. But at some point, the crisis ended. It just faded from our attention. It faded from view. We started focusing on the people in the suburbs, and their political agenda became the political agenda. If you don't live near clean water, you should move to be near it. You want good schools? Move closer to it. If you can't afford it, that's your problem. Versus it being something that we all should care about. So we've started to rely on nonprofits. We've relied on colleges, universities, and stadiums, and hotels, and conventions, and Olympic game bids to do the work for us, and to make places more sexy, and to make them really wonderful casinos, and really wonderful places and spectacles that we can view and say, ooh, it looks good, but not be concerned about where people earn their money or how it actually looks underneath all of the glitz and the glamour and the steel and the glass. So if planning is about the organization of hope, then we have to have it. And what I have found is that planning is toughest where hope is the hardest to find. So I've done work in English Avenue, just north of here. I've done work in Haiti, Philadelphia, and Detroit now. And it's the same. People are skeptical, and they should be. Planners were complicit in what happened in the 1950s and 60s when neighborhoods were demolished wholesale. They were defined to be blighted, and they just got demolished. Those of you into Detroit any time in the past decade have seen the same phenomenon, that we look at a house and say, it doesn't look good anymore, just bulldoze it, we're done. Versus saving what used to be someone's home, someone's life, someone's community. It's not just a commodity to be bought and sold or to appreciate in value, it has another life. And we don't just bulldoze it because it doesn't suit our needs anymore. So after the Haitian earthquake, I went to Haiti several times, and I remember a moment when I was sitting in a meeting at the UN log base, and there were a group of Haitian officials sitting on one side of the table and a room surrounded by white NGO workers from Europe and Latin America and the United States, and they were running the meeting. And they looked at each other and said, "We can just switch to English. It's okay. We don't have to speak in Creole. Is that okay with everyone?" And they did. And they continued to have a conversation, to my horror, about how to reconstruct Haiti without Haitians in a decision-making role. This happens here too. This is happening in Detroit as well. This is happening in Atlanta, to say, we should move Friendship Baptist Church for the Falcons. Should we consult the people around to see if they should care about this? Will it affect them? Does it matter that this institution where Spelman was founded, where Morehouse spent a good part of its early history, can just go? And that's okay. For a stadium that may have a lifespan of 15, 20, 25 years at the most. Is that right? Does it make sense? Does it make sense for an NGO that doesn't do planning to come into a country where it doesn't know the language, the customs, the legal structures, and say, we're going to tell you what you should look like, and you should thank us because we're here to help? That kind of planning makes me nervous. But I'm here to ask you to join me in my field of planning. And I'm asking you because sometimes this happens the way that it does because the advocates aren't in the room. If we're not in the room to say, I want to protect my community, I want to protect this home, then other people can come in and tell you how it should be and how it's going to look going forward. So this experience that I had with my parents in moving to Haiti and moving out of Florida really made me suspicious of people with good intentions. I always look a Trojan horse right in the mouth and wonder what all the motives are behind it. I love my parents, but I still kind of sometimes say, was that the best decision? They did it because they loved me. They did it with the best of intentions. But I also recognize that there was something else going on. As a person of Haitian descent, I care very deeply about sovereignty. This is who we are as a people. We planned as Haitians to make sure that we were never enslaved again. If you ever have the luxury of going to Haiti, go to Fort Jacques, go to the Citadel, and look at the large, massive structures that we built to make sure that if the French ever came back to reclaim their property, we would be ready. They never came. But that required planning to say, we're going to be ready for you. We will not be re-enslaved. We will think long term, and we will defend this beautiful earth that belongs to us. So I want to switch and tell you a story about how planning might affect you when you become a homeowner or when you leave this place. So one of my very best friends, a Spelman alum, she bought a home a few years ago, and she had a dream that she went to medical school and she was going to renovate it, rent out one half, live in the other half, and she was going to build a sanctuary for herself in the middle of the city. She was going to have a big backyard. It was going to be lush, green. We were going to have brunches, breakfasts, dinners, dinner parties. We were going to have all this great stuff in this backyard, in this beautiful home that she was renovating, literally by hand, herself. I helped her hang up the shutters, hang up the curtains, hang up everything, and make this place a really beautiful home. So a year into living in this home, a private school decides they want to buy the lot next to her. They purchase the property, they redevelop it, and go to the city of College Park and say, we would like to actually close some streets and build playing fields for our students. And they do so. And she gives them the benefit of the doubt. She gives the city the benefit of the doubt. She gives everyone the benefit of the doubt. And the entire time I'm studying the site plans with her, and I'm saying, you should be nervous about this. Because this sanctuary that you have designed for yourself may get disrupted. Your quiet enjoyment, your sovereignty of this wonderful home will be disturbed by these playing fields. Things move forward. They closed off the street. They moved storm drains. There were apartment buildings across the street. They gave all the residents a month's rent and said, Godspeed, good luck. Go away. And they did. The playing field has gone up. And it turns out that there was a lot left out of their site plan, including the 20-foot fence that now surrounds her home, and the stadium lights that shine directly into her kitchen and her living room. So the idea that this really wonderful space that she enjoyed, that she put her blood, sweat, and tears into, could just get disrupted by this neighbor, this incompatible land use. And this is what planning does. It doesn't just plan for the future, it also protects. And so it was only until this happened that she looked at me and said, I get it. This is what you do. I said, yeah, this is what I do. Because my job is to make sure that the city does its job to protect you, and that this is a shared vision so that everyone who's here has the opportunity to enjoy the sovereignty over their space. So let me say this to you. I want to connect this. I want to pay you guys a huge compliment as a generation. A lot of us have cared about Black Lives Matter, but we didn't articulate it in the way that your generation has. And it's very timely, and I want to thank you for that. But I want to extend it out a little bit further and just say, and not insult that phrase, but say, how do we turn Black Lives Matter into long-term planning and policy? So if we make this about a long-term vision for what we're going to be when we have the communities that we want, what does that mean? That Black Lives Matter isn't just, I want you to acknowledge that we exist and we deserve to be here and we should not be hurt, but also, how do our spaces make us matter and how do we matter in them? How do we become sovereign in our spaces? So this idea that we should have a common will as a people and as a larger society to make sure that that is what we're actually aspiring to. That we're cooperating and coordinating with each other to make sure that we're thinking about the common weal. So we don't trust government as we used to. And some of this is the government's fault and some of this is our fault. Those of you who are watching the news know that we have the situation in Flint, Michigan, where the government literally poisoned its own people with lead. It knew what it was doing. That to the highest levels, it was very clear that many, many people knew that the water was not drinkable for anyone. It wasn't even fit for GM to use in its production of cars. But it was given to people anyway. If we're going to meet the challenges of the next century, climate change, social unrest, mass migrations, we're going to have to restore the legitimacy of government. And we have to have a way of having collective action. We have to have collective action that allows us to respond to the challenges that we're confronted with. It's impossible to respond to these if we don't trust our government to give us clean water, not to kill us, to not punish those who hurt us. It's impossible to do that. So let me tell you what I want. And when I say I want good communities, this is what I want. I want to enjoy safety from gun violence, regardless of who the shooter is. I want children to be able to walk to the store to get a quart of milk or some produce. And I want them to get home safe. I want there to be eyes on the street that watches them. I want there to be transit connections to get people to and from work and to family-sustaining wage work, long-term work. I want the people who have that income from that work to spend their money locally. I want them to support local entrepreneurs. I want those entrepreneurs to hire people who live locally. I want the children who shop in those stores to have access to good schools. I want their teachers to be well paid. I want that school to be connected to 2- and 4-year education and other options. Schools are very much connected to planning. If you're thinking about education, what happens in schools, what happens in the community is going to affect what happens in your classroom. The school should be a community center. It should be a place where we can co-locate parks, libraries, adult education. And we should have intentional civility. When you go to places like museums, we are intentionally civil with each other. But we should be able to extend that out, and that by designing places that are more interesting and full, that we have this intentional civility everywhere. We have it in parks where families gather. We have it in churches. We have it in markets. We have it in as many places as we possibly can have. And I know some of you are probably thinking that this is just too idealized. It's socialism. It's insane. But it's not. We used to do this very well. We used to provide housing for people at different stages of their life courses so that you can have an apartment when you are younger and you're trying to finish college, and have a home that you can raise your children in when you're an adult, and a smaller home that you can live in as you age. And that you can flexibly move from one form of housing tenure to the next without skipping a beat, and still remain connected to your people and to your community. And that community should be embedded in a region that is vibrant and interesting and growing and resilient to economic shifts, to natural disasters, and lots of other things. But this, again, goes back to this idea of sovereignty. So let me say this to those of you who are thinking, I still am not convinced that planning is for me. It might not be. But I want to make planning about all of us and about something that you can actually kind of cling on to. That this affects you whether you realize it or not. At some point, we're going to have a new form of music that follows hip-hop. That's only going to get created if we are in close communion with each other. The black church will only survive if we are in close communion with each other. And that requires our space to be organized in very particular ways. It requires us to be in places that are intentionally for us. What happened in Ferguson didn't happen by accident. It happened because basically resources were diverted away from a particular city and people there were oppressed. I would imagine that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot of effort to revitalize places like Ferguson. But that revitalization actually has to be about the people who were there. So I'm going to share this phrase with you. It's become one of my favorite. My new friend, Maurice Cox, who's the director of city planning in Detroit, says this often, and it's become his mantra for how he wants Detroit to get revitalized. And it goes, nothing about us without us is for us. Nothing about us without us is for us. So revitalization has to be about us, not about the place, not about the architecture. It has to be about us, and that you can do both at the same time. So let me say this to those of you, because I know that all of you are coming from different disciplines, and some of you are pretty locked in. You came to Morehouse knowing, I'm going to do pre-law, I'm going to go to law school, I'm going to be on that track, or I'm here pre-med and I'm going to be on that track. In education, I'm going to be on that track, or I'm in the social sciences, I'm on that track. I want you to do more than just hear this lecture, walk away, and just kind of get your credit for Crown Forum and move on. I want you to become students of the urban environment, to understand what it means when there is a sidewalk and there is not a sidewalk, when there are bus routes or not bus routes. If you find a neighborhood where sidewalks are lacking, that was probably intentional. Someone wanted to send the message or make it clear that we didn't want this to be a walkable place, and it isn't. If they say we only want to allow homes that are 5,000 square feet and above, they're sending a message that they only want people who can afford that type of house or can afford to drive a car to get to and from it. They're sending a message. These things don't happen by accident. Understand when things are beautiful, that when we preserve and protect a place, we're making a statement about how much we value it and how important it is. That badly constructed or managed schools says as much about our values as a great cathedral or mosque does about our faith. If we exclude multifamily housing, we're saying something about the poor. If we focus on the rich, we're saying something different. So those of you who want to go to law school, I want you to do that. But I also want you to think about combining at least some part of planning into what you study. The bedrock of planning and the bedrock of law is property. That if you don't understand how people exchange or share property, if you don't understand how we protect it, then you're probably not going to be a very good lawyer, because that's really what law is. And planning seeks to do the same thing, to protect people's property, to make sure that if you become sovereign of your domain, you get to remain so. Those of you who are going to divinity school, your church has a context, a local and a global one. The health of the community around you will determine who's in your pews and how healthy you are when they show up. You have to care about that. Not just when your sermon ends, but the entire week. Between the sermons, how are they and how are they managing? If you're an MBA student, you're going to go on to business school and you want to go to Wall Street. Let me say, do that too. But a big part of what we do is placemaking. And nothing that we do as planners functions without capital. It just doesn't work. Real estate developers do more placemaking than I do. And I can't hate them for it. It's really important. But use that capital to make sure that everyone gets to benefit from what you do. So those of you on the other side who are up here in Nabbert Bay and some of the science buildings, you probably think biology, physics, chemistry, nothing to do with us. We can't police water quality, air quality, water pollution, ground pollution without you. To understand the science of what goes on around us in our environment and the interaction between human settlements and the sciences is why we need you, and we need you involved. Those of you going to medical school, this has nothing to do with you. Wrong. You're going to spend a great deal of your practice dealing with the effects of obesity. Neighborhoods that lack sidewalks, that lack complete street networks, means that you don't have people who are walking, which means we can't deal with obesity because they have no space or green space or sidewalks where they can actually deal with their obesity and exercise. Those of you who are in psychology, I need to understand the effects of gun violence, of deprivation, of identity, of loss. And I need you to understand bias, probably more than anything else. Why do all the white people leave when we show up? How does that work? How do I understand bias? And how do I understand the history of it? So I come from the social sciences. I was a sociology major here. I did urban studies. And so I'm speaking to that crowd here. I love the social sciences, and I still consider myself a social scientist. However, I get really tired of this endless discussion. I love that half of my week is in Detroit. That I now just walk into the city planning office and is like, hey, what are we doing today? I did that when I lived here. I do that now. I hope that I always get to do it. That a big part of what I do is not just talking and teaching students and debating with other academics, but actually trying to create the change I want to see. But if you're focusing on planning itself, know that planning itself is this wide ocean, and there's all of this stuff within it. There's urban design, which is focused on the beauty of the places and the relationship between the buildings themselves. How we create this itinerary for the user that is beautiful and pleasant with street furniture and plantings and greenery to actually really make places interesting and vital. If you're worried about climate change, if you're thinking about all the congestion that you probably deal with every day that you come to this campus, either on MARTA or on the connector, that we need transportation planners. Those of you who are living out in Douglasville and Austell, there is no reason that we can't just extend MARTA 2 miles west, and that would cut that traffic in half. That requires us to understand something about how people travel, why they travel, and how that works. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I know that at some point we are going to run out of oil and coal and natural resources. We're going to have to get smart about how we move people and goods around to do that. We're going to have to think smarter about land use. That those of you who think that climate change is only about emissions, you're probably not seeing the whole picture. That there's this urban heat island effect that is heating up the environment just as fast as emissions are. And a lot of that has to do with how we use the land in the cities that we've built. But probably the thing that I care most about is housing. And that if you're not watching what's going on in Africa, the land grabs that's going on there, if you're not watching what's going on in cities, one of the biggest challenges we're going to face in the next century is housing. Where is the housing going to go for a growing human population, and who's going to be able to access it? How well will people live? And also, what purpose will they have in the work that they do? How will they produce what they want to produce? How will they get trained to do it? And where will that training take place? How will we give them dignity and purpose through their work? There's also some other burgeoning areas like food systems and disaster response planning. So when I talk about sovereignty, this is really where some of this stuff comes from, is that it seems like something very simple, but those of you who rely on prepared foods, you don't actually have sovereignty over just what you eat. And then there's this wonderful idea that I should have a sovereignty not just over my space, but over everything that I touch, including what comes into my body. And if there is a disaster, I should have some control over how I respond and how resilient I am to those challenges. So the Michigan students who are sitting up front here, we're going to be here for the next 3 days. We're going to be talking about planning and working on getting you all to come to Detroit with us. It's okay. It's all right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Because whether you realize it or not, we have to live and be somewhere. We have to create a world that we want to actually be in. And I don't just want to be in a space because it's what got left over. I want to live in a beautiful, vibrant, wonderful space, and I want to have some control over what my future looks like in that space. And I could use your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Etienne. If you can join us up here. This is a gift. I won't do all the pageantry. I know you're a runner, so just put that somewhere. But if you could just stand and do Dear Old Morehouse, and we're out. We got scanners outside, okay? We'll just do it a cappella. Ready? Dear Old Morehouse.